For our top international story this hour, we look to Syria, where this week a U.S. official set terms on when exactly American troops may leave the country. Speaking on a conference call, U.S. Special Representative for Syria, James Franklin Jeffrey, told reporters that once Iran withdraws its presence from Syria, U.S. troops would follow suit, adding all foreign forces would be prepared to exit if a political deal is reached to end the war, which has been waged on the country since 2011. The envoy added, quote, "The Russians, having been there before, would not in fact withdraw, but you've got 4 other outside military forces all operating inside Syria right now. It's a dangerous situation." The envoy's declaration comes just as Turkish media reported unconfirmed claims that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have sent troops to Syria's northeast, alleging, quote, "The soldiers are purportedly stationed with the U.S.-led coalition." Yanis Safak notes, quote, Saudi Foreign Minister Abdel Al-Jubeir confirmed in April a report published in the Wall Street Journal saying that U.S. troops in Syria could be replaced by an Arab force. Jubeir said Riyadh was in talks with Washington about such a force. Meanwhile, in New York, the United Nations discussed Syria's future this week, particularly calls to convene a constitutional committee, perhaps by the end of this year.
The political process is a process that belongs to the Syrians and has to be led by the Syrians, because it is the Syrian people that have the exclusive rights to decide on the future of their country without any interference from outside. Given that the Constitution and everything connected to it is an issue of sovereignty, which must be decided by the Syrians themselves, any kind of interference or any attempts to interfere in Syria's domestic affairs is unacceptable.
U.S. Ambassador Jonathan Cohn asserted Washington's view of Syria's internal affairs.
A committee with Assad or Iranian veto power is not credible and does not represent the interests of the Syrian people. Let us recall how this began, not with terrorism or with military combat, but with a government violently repressing peaceful demonstrators. That government must not now be given a veto over fixing the mess it made.
With Syria's sovereignty in question, I spoke earlier to former UK MP George Galloway. George, I want to start by getting your reaction to UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, who had this to say when addressing Ambassador Jafari's concerns.
Respecting Syria's sovereignty has never been called in question. And I would like to remind the Ambassador Jafari, who is there and reminding us always about it, has never been put in question by the UN.
Is that true, George?
Well, perhaps not by the UN, but definitely by the US, which is rather a powerful part of the UN and frequently seeks to dictate the course of world events and UN events. And if it doesn't like what the UN is doing, it simply bypasses it, having burgled, beaten, browbeaten, bullied, sometimes bribed the people within it. But leaving that aside, and if you can also park the perversity of a US official dictating to Syria when foreign forces, most of which have absolutely no legal right to be in Syria, dictating the conditions or the circumstances in which they will leave, he was in fact right. It is highly dangerous to have all these foreign forces in a small country with the agency of all these Islamist fanatic fighters there. The tripwires are multitudinous and can be tripped over by any of these armies at any time. So the very best thing is for the foreign forces that have no right to be there, for them to be withdrawn. And as to the idea of the American forces being replaced by Saudi and Emirati forces, I'm sure the Syrians who will be attacking them will be saying, bring it on.
The U.S. claims foreign troops should only leave Syria once Iran has withdrawn its forces from the country. What is Iran's role in this war, and is that a fair demand?
Well, Iran doesn't have forces in the country. There are volunteer Iranians who are there because the rest of the world ganged up on Syria, armed and tooled and financed the world's worst people in ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the rest to try and overthrow the Syrian government, which they have failed to do. So I'm sure these volunteers would be more than happy to return to their homes, and it's right that they should do so. Russian forces, as even the US acknowledge, are in a completely different relationship here because they have legal, internationally enshrined basing rights inside Syria. But the Turkish forces are there without permission, without legal authority, as are the US, as would be the Saudi and Emirati, and as are, by the way, the Kurdish armed militias. A state is only a state if it has a monopoly on force inside its own country, and the sooner we return to that, the better.
And this point is never discussed in the media or by U.S. officials. They never acknowledge which countries are there on the invitation of the sovereign Syrian government and which are not. Former UK MP George Galloway, thanks so much.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.